The client that I observed throughout the semester for the FBA project was a 3-year-old little girl who engaged in non-compliant behavior, specifically when she was directed to do a non-preferred activity or task. The FAST scores indicated that non-compliance is maintained by attention and gaining access to preferred objects. They also indicate that escape is also a maintaining variable. The results of the FAST are depicted in this graph. The results of the QABF indicated that the functions for the non-compliance behaviors included gaining attention, obtaining a tangible item, and escaping the situation. Both the FAST and the QBAF produce similar results, as you can see in this graph and the previous one. The next graph depicts the conditional probability of the target behavior. Noncompliance behavior occurred 100% of the time when a demand was given, and then 60% of the time when the client escaped or avoided the demand, and lastly 40% of the time observed the client followed through with the demand. The CSA graph indicated that escape is the most likely to be the maintaining function. The second most maintaining function is following through with the directive. Tangible appears to be non-contingent, and attention appears to be the function of other behaviors. Non-compliance behaviors tended to occur in the mid-afternoon and right at nighttime. The graph indicates that the highest rate of occurrence was at 7:30 p.m. The majority of the non-compliance behaviors occurred during the client's bedtime routine. There was also a significant amount of behavioral occurrences during the client's nap time routine. During the 5 days of observation, non-compliance behavior occurred 44 times, and the average number of behavioral events occurred 8.8 times per day. The graph depicts this information. The most prevalent antecedent recorded was demand. This occurred 79% of the observation period. 11% of the time, non-compliance behaviors occurred when the client was denied an activity. The most common consequence recorded during the observation period was escaping the demand. Verbal attention served as a consequence 18% of the time, followed by following through with the demand, and then, as you can see, physical attention and receiving the desired activity. The antecedent assessment indicated that the client was non-compliant even when she was playing freely and not asked to complete a task. The behavior increased as the difficulty of the task increased. However, as the number of trials increased, her behavior decreased. Non-compliance behavior decreased when she was given assistance, even though the task was difficult or hard. During the preference assessment, 5 stimuli were tested. Those included blocks, puzzle, the book, the ball, and the crayons. The data indicated that the blocks were the highest preferred stimuli, and then the lowest preferred stimuli was the puzzle, and this was picked last the majority of the time. The following graph depicts the frequency of completing a task paired with a preferred and a not preferred stimulus. The client was given a task to count to 10 when given the directive to do so. She was asked to count 5 times during each phase. 3 sessions were observed. During the initial baseline phase, the client counted to 10 7 times. When the highest preferred stimulus was presented, the client counted to 10 independently 13 times across all 3 sessions. In the second baseline phase, the client counted to 10 independently 6 times across the 3 sessions. And then in the last phase, when the lowest preferred stimulus was presented, the client counted to 10 4 times across the 3 sessions. So it can be concluded that the highest preferred stimulus, which was the blocks, as we saw from the previous slide, produced the highest frequency of the rote counting. The lowest preferred stimulus, which was the puzzle, produced the lowest frequency of rote counting. This next graph looks at the functional analysis with the preference assessment. During the first session, the client chose to engage with the researcher and the toys throughout the entire 5 minutes. She didn't attempt to move to the other table, which had nothing available, where she would be sitting alone. During the second session, the client chose to engage with the researcher, who provided undivided attention the entire 5 minutes of the trial. The client didn't attempt to move to the other table to play by herself with the toys. Then during the third session, the client chose to stay with the researcher who provided attention, but also asked her to do a task, which was clean up. She stayed at the table the entire 5 minutes and did not attempt to move to the next table. And then during the last session, the client chose to play with the toys alone the entire 5 minutes. She didn't attempt to move to the other table. This graph describes the results from the percentage of intervals with engagement stimuli. When attention and toys were presented to the client, she engaged with the stimuli 80% of the time. When the client chose to sit at the table where the researcher provided attention only, the client engaged with the stimuli 93% of the time. In the third session, the client chose to engage with the stimuli 50% of the time, and then the last session, the client chose to play by herself and there was no attention provided and no engagement. In the first session, the client chose to receive attention and there was no interaction between escape and the engagement of stimuli. In the second session, the client did not choose to play alone with toys and there was no interaction between escape and engagement of stimuli. During the third session, the client did not choose to sit at the table alone and there was no interaction between the escape and engagement of stimuli. The last session, the client chose to play alone with toys and not to receive attention. She engaged with the stimuli 93% of the time, and then during the first and last session, the client engaged with the toys. The first session, she engaged 80% of the time, and in the last session, she engaged with the toys 93% of the time. This graph looks at the percentage of intervals with the problem behavior. When the client was receiving attention and playing with the toys, or playing alone with the toys, there were no occurrences of the problem behavior. The problem behavior then occurred 13% of the time when the client was receiving attention only. The highest frequency of behavior occurred when the client was receiving attention but also asked to perform a task. The problem behavior occurred 43% of the time. It's concluded that the client's problem behaviors occur when a demand is placed on her. She is able to play alone with toys. So, in conclusion, to end the FBA, the hypothesis statement would be that given